So it just was built into the Irish consciousness and probably this Spanish consciousness as well. And there are lots of traditions and lots of evidence where the Spanish actually considered the Irish as an extension of themselves. So I suppose in the way that Northern Europeans consider America as theirs, they colonized it first, or certainly Western Europe. So it was very much associated with Spain. And then as all the various ebbs and flows of history in Europe came and went, there were periods when the relationship with Spain was not the primary relationship, and then it would reestablish itself and so on. So if we take the time when the Celts from northern Spain migrated up to Ireland, and remember now when a people, and back in those days, it took generations. It didn't happen, in a decade or two. So they would have acquired certain characteristics of the local people in northern Spain, so that they would be a little blend. So therefore, the Celtic variety coming from northern Spain would be quite different, for instance, from the Celts who had settled and established themselves in Belgium, which was the Belgae, but it wasn't Belgium as we know it quite right now, but it was that northwestern portion of Europe, the continent of Europe, and the Belgae are very, very well identified there. So that and then of course the various Gaelic tribes in France, but the folks on the north end of Spain were a little different. I suppose as you move down south, you tend to change slightly. There's just differences in the way you live, and their modern their modern descendants are the Basque people, and they're very conscious of some mystical link with Ireland. As you go down further into Spain, of course, then it becomes less so, because they're more African, more Mediterranean. So the northwest portion of Spain would have very strong links with Ireland, and they tended to head for there almost instinctively, like birds, like migrating birds. They don't even have to think about it. And it's very interesting, when we did the Flight of the Earls a few months ago, and we looked at the map that the Irish Times did, and they came straight, it's up there somewhere, and it was not a surprise at all that they headed directly for the northwestern tip of Spain. As you know, they weren't able to land, so they had to go back up into through the washing machine, as we call it over there, the Bay of Biscay, because it's so incredibly rough, and landed in the Seine Valley into Rouen. But it's amazing to me how human beings have this instinct. I think you call it atavistic. It's something that's there, you don't know, but you're led. It just somehow comes out in you. Now, coming into the more modern period, the more modern time, because the Celts no doubt did, if not conquer Ireland, they certainly influenced it, and they were certainly the dominant race on the island of Ireland for at least 1,000 years. They probably completed their colonization or their domination of Ireland probably 400 years BC. They would have come maybe 500 years BC, but maybe they would have been the dominant culture linguistically and culturally by 100, 200 years BC, because they were in an Iron Age. What distinguished them was they were an Iron Age people. So they dominated the island of Ireland right through until the Norman invasion of 1169. So that whole period was very, very Celtic, and all of the cultural things, all very, very Celtic. So, and that was very connected with particularly northern Spain. Now, that was all interrupted for a few hundred years because Europe changed very dramatically from, I suppose you could say 1066, from the Norman invasion and conquest of England. But there was a lot of other things going on in the rest of Europe. So it was, what was happening in Europe was the most powerful local kings were just expanding their. These things tend to happen, by the way. If you look at world history, they tend to happen. If not all over the world, certainly in a region-wise. You know, we had a great flood of dictatorships in the early 30s, the 1930s in Europe. It just sort of took over, and we go through these waves of dictatorships and democracy. Then we become totally hooked on democracy, like in the latter half of the 1700s with the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and so on. So we tend to go through those little phases. I'm wondering if maybe we're not going back into a more totalitarian phase right now with what happened yesterday in Russia with Putin, where they're now all calling him Tsar Putin. So, you know, fortunately the folks in Venezuela did not follow suit, and I was kind of wondering if they did, would it be heralding in, you know, this authoritarian era? Hope not. Anyway, what happened, it seems to happen anyway in Europe, is from about, from the turn of the millennia, really. And strange enough, it was also happening in Ireland. The only time that we really had a truly political unity in Ireland was in 1014, or prior to 1014, when we had Brian Boru. Brian Boru was the only really truly High King of Ireland that really actually ruled the country. Prior to that, you had people who were called High Kings, but they were nominally High Kings. So we were totally averse to centralized power. Just didn't like it at all. But we were very united culturally, we, the Irish, linguistically, culturally, and legally. We had the same legal system, but we weren't united politically. So, and then that, of course, has been used against us and said, well, you were never united. Well, it depends on what you mean by united. If you're united, certainly language is a very powerful uniter, because it's the wings upon which social thought flies. You know, it's very, very defining, and probably even at least as important, if not even more important, is the laws. So the Brehon laws were incredibly uniting, and the thing that's interesting is religion hardly played a part in it at all. It really wasn't. It wasn't something that we're terribly interested in. And if I may come back to the Scots-Irish too, by the way, the Scots-Irish, they didn't really care very much. They were here because they wanted to get out of Ireland and they hated England. So they were a very powerful force for independence in America, no question about that. And they didn't care if you call them Catholic, Protestant. It didn't mean much to them. The last thing that somebody coming over in Ireland, from Ireland, in the early 1700s or even the late 1600s, would have thought of himself as a Catholic or Protestant. It really wouldn't have dawned on him, because you didn't have the sort of parish network. You didn't have that kind of anything even close to the kind of control that we think of as always having been there. It just wasn't. So therefore, the Irish that would have come out here and gone straight inland because all the good land was taken in Pennsylvania and went off into the mountains. They didn't know what they were. They just knew that there was Christ and stuff like that. And that's about all they knew. Except some of those that had gotten really into it. So if they said you're Protestant, yeah, okay, yeah, sure, So therefore, it didn't really mean anything. But later on, when they were trying to define and they were trying to pretend that the Irish did not, they started saying, well, these were Protestants, Irish, and they were Scots-Irish and so on. So that's that is a what would I say, a convenient sort of fabrication. So if I could just make this point, because I'm looping back to where I just came from. So I just want you to understand that don't by for one second think that somehow it was a religious connection, certainly not even Christian, let alone Catholic, between the Spanish and the Irish.